mic. So if I have some people, I'll switch over here and see. Looks like Tony might be here. Let me know if you are here, Tony. Unfortunately, I had to send a second link out to everyone because I made a boo-boo on the streaming side of things to share it with you. So hopefully you got that in time. And I believe you did. Yep, Tony's here. Good to see you, man. And aren't we glad we got that whole get into the course caboclo figured out? Get rid of this. Yeah, turned out you've been a member since way back when. You've had access to it since then. And at the time, you just may not have known it. But now we do, and now you've got it. Let me know if you can hear me okay, Tony. Let me know if you can hear the guitar. I'll turn things up if need be. Eric, hey man. I'll be cooking dinner, but I'll keep an ear up for this. Oh man, you're funny. It's good to hear from you. Good to see you. Yeah, we're just about to do dinner, but I always, my dinner's, at least for the time being while I do these sessions, it's kind of already done for me by the time I'm all finished. Which is kind of neat. I like that. Little pampering once in a while never hurt anybody, right? So yeah, I just want to check to make sure that you guys can hear the guitar. Let me know. Great sounds, the great sound and vision. Okay, good. Thank you, Eric. Working on getting better at this technology. And yeah. Yes, got started today. Turn up a little bit. Yes, got it started today. Turn up. What do you want me to turn up? My voice? Or the guitar? Or a little bit of both? I can turn up a little bit of both. Here's the guitar. And then my voice. I see there's a few other people that have chimed in. Let me know you're here. Once again, I hope everybody got the new link to get into here. But, you know, if all else fails and you don't manage to chime in live, you've always got the recording to go to. Tony says, yes, both. Tony says, good. Okay. All right. Brought that up a little bit, clean it up. And I'm just going to wait another minute or so. We still have some time before we get started. And then I'm going to hurt your brain a bit. I decided to push the boundaries today. Of course, I always have my cup of tea handy. Get things started, get myself relaxed, and away we go. It is 5 o'clock here, Atlantic Daylight Time, on the spot. So I am going to get started. I'm going to flip over here. Your microphone has a great sound. Good, I'm glad. This is a condenser mic, so for this kind of stuff, seems to work nicer than the dynamic mics. They're more sensitive, so they pick up a good tone. Haven't got one. Yeah, they're good. I use them to mic up guitars, acoustic guitars a lot, Tony. Electrics, of course. I just microphone off the amp, and I often use the standard Shure 57. Is it the M57? Yeah, SM57. That one's pretty robust and very standard in the industry. All right. Well, let's officially get things rocking and rolling here. Welcome again, everyone. Steve Dempster, Dempster Guitar Studio. Hoping you are doing well during the, as many people refer, the big lockdown. A lot of adjustments to be made. A lot more people now online to try to continue connecting, staying in touch, and that's what I'm doing here. It's my effort to stay in touch with those of you that have been so gracious enough to subscribe in one form or another, either to my channel, which if you haven't subscribed to yet, you should. And because I'll be doing a lot more of these. I mean, I've come to enjoy this process quite a bit. I like learning about the technology of it and eventually get nicer gear and nicer backgrounds and music to play and stuff like that. Would be cool. But I hope you're doing well. And today, every time I finish one, I go, well, what will I cover next time? And in the absence, I'm not picking on you, but in the absence of not having a ton of ideas coming from my peeps, I'll just make something up. But I make something up that I have to admit is based on the fact that, if you recall, some of you will, when I did the Where Stuff Comes From series a while back, and then maybe a touch of the Facebook Live stuff I did just before Christmas. The mix of those two, if you've been a part of that at some level, there's a part of at least today's presentation that assumes you have some comfort with some of the material from those presentations. Now, that could be an incorrect assumption on my part, and I will attempt to fill in the gaps the best I can. But I am going to say that today's session, number one, I do not expect you to walk away with tremendous insight. Mostly because, number two, the content for many of you, I expect, is very novel. It's an approach to viewing the fretboard of your guitar in a way that, quite frankly, most guitarists don't get access to unless they're pursuing the instrument with a rather high level of seriousness, for the most part. And so, again, don't be surprised if, as I go through stuff, you're scratching your head, you're trying to make sense of it. It takes a little while for certain concepts to settle in, and we have to talk about them often, and we can. I'm very happy to do it. In fact, if needs must, if it's required of me, at the end of this session, I'd be happy to do a part two that's used as a kind of a refreshment on the ideas, because it might take a few hits to get it into your mind. Bottom line is, if you're feeling frustrated because you're not following along, that's perfectly normal. I'm putting that out there transparently at the beginning so that you don't get mad at me for what I'm about to talk about. But it is a very, very useful perspective on the fretboard, and it's a different visualization of the fretboard than you might be used to. And yet it's very common. There's nothing esoteric about it. It's a very normal way for advancing players, whether you consider yourself in that category or not. It is a very common way to view the fretboard, of which they think nothing of it. So there's nothing esoteric about it. It's just that I know for most recreational players in my community, it's probably something they haven't been exposed to yet. So that's what we're going to talk about. And it's all about, as you can tell from the titles, it's all about building chords from intervals. Intervals. Some palm trees would be good. In the background, you mean? I guess you do. Yeah, some palm trees. I had a little background at one point. It might have been the same one, but I had a small vase of dried flowers in it. And I had that for quite a while, doing some video. You may even see it, Tony, in the course with the little flowers at the side. And when I changed that, when I did something different, I got a lot of flack from people. They said they liked the quietness of the previous backdrop. It was more serene. It was pleasant. It was, all that sort of stuff. So this is kind of serene. It's pretty basic. I don't want to clutter it up with too much. I will point out, though, you'll notice there's a book back here. And I thought it'd be interesting to let you guys know stuff about what I'm doing around music just in my spare time. And some of that is reading books on music. And one of them, I've had this book for quite a while, and I'm probably on my third read of it now, because you get more insight as you go through it. And it's simply called This Is Your Brain on Music, and it's by Daniel Levitin. I believe he's from the States, but he actually teaches and is an academic researcher in psychology, cognitive psychology, studying music and how it affects the brain and all other aspects. He's actually in Canada at, I believe, University of Montreal. I'm not sure. But anyway, if you're interested in a really good read, if you're into that stuff, really digging deep as to how music affects your brain, he's the guy to listen to. He's got a lot of insights, and all of it is worthwhile. I'll simply say that to you. Anybody that tells you that playing an instrument is like basket weaving, sometimes we get that impression that we're not doing something important. Check out that book, and you'll realize how complex the whole game really is. And so I'll present a series of these as we go through, just to let you know what I'm up to. Most of them I've already read, but I wouldn't mind presenting them to you in case you're interested. Okay, I'm going to... hey, Jerry, good to see you. I'm going to flip the screen over here. And I'm going to begin with, I've got a lot of pictures for you to show, and they're going to cover the book, and they're going to cover my bobblehead, but not all of them, but there will be one that stays there throughout. Here it is. Now, just again, so I can test the system, if you don't mind letting me know that you can see those two images on the screen, okay. I can enlarge them a bit if you'd like me to. I don't want to get in the way of my guitar, but just let me know. And everything, what at the back, the book. Yeah, well, I just mentioned it, man. This is Your Brain on Music. I think it's a takeoff on that commercial that used to be, This Is Your Brain on Drugs. Remember that TV commercial when the fried egg hit the pan? This is your brain on drugs. I think it's a takeoff on that. Okay, let's go here. Again, here's an assumption I'm making, but there is the information. I am going to talk about how to visualize chord building. Yes, from the point of view of the notes that make up a chord, and I know many of you haven't necessarily, and still don't necessarily, do that. I always encourage people to take the time to do it, but I recognize that in the midst of trying to play a tune and all that sort of stuff, it's hard to kind of think about and fit in. But I would try to do it. But more importantly, to look at chords from the point of view of what are called intervals. Now, if you look at the top image, you'll see that I have the G major scale drawn out there, just on the third string. No mystery there. You've seen that kind of image if you've been following me for some time. You've seen that a lot. I'm just going to go back here for a minute. Yep, good. And it's just this sound, as you well know. That's the sound of a G major scale. Now, I do this on one string for demonstration purposes, for teaching purposes. Of course, you already know you can go across the strings from any G note. that you can work with, right? So the more familiar you are with the major scale, the more comfortable you're going to be with just about every other concept we talk about. And I reiterate that a lot because I know a lot of you don't work on it. And I don't mean that as a critique. I just mean that it's just not the sound that inspires you. And yet it's the sound, it's the tool around which most of the answers to every question you have in music will in one form or another bounce back to. So it makes sense that the source of the answer to your question resides in that sort of a scale. You should know the sound, you should know how to play it, you should know its interval structure. Now, previously, and when I edit this video, I'll put a card up here for you so you can reference it. Previously, I talked about tones and semitones and such all the way through, and that would help you see the scale laid out very comfortably. From G to A is a tone, A to B is a tone, B to C, semitone, etc., etc. No need to keep going over that. That should be getting well established in your mind by now. Now, if you look at the lower image, each one of the letters of not just this major scale, but any major scale are assigned, no mystery here, they're just assigned a number or an interval. We can think of it this way, and I'll explain that right now. So if we think of the G note as the first degree or the first note of the scale, which it is, and then you go through to number 2, which is the A note, number 3 is the B, number 4 is the C, etc. By the way, on the second image down here, don't worry about those little symbols you see in front of the numbers. Those are just telling you refined versions of the interval. For example, from the G, the 1, to the A, the 2, the little triangle that sits in front of the 2 is just a shorthand version of saying that the 2 fret distance is a major second, not a minor second. Okay? So be aware of that. And then the 3 that you see means that that note, which is B, is 3 notes higher than G. In other words, it's 3 notes higher than 1. So far, so good? So the intervals that we're talking about are the interval from the first degree of the scale to whatever other note in the scale you're talking about. So what you end up with is, after the G note, the A is the interval of a second from G. The B is the interval of a third from G. The C is the interval of a fourth from G. D is a fifth from G. No mystery. Look, G, A, B, C, D. You include the notes you're starting on, by the way. E is a sixth from G. It's 6 notes away from G. F sharp, and you should know why Fs are sharp in the key of G based on the interval formula we've talked about many times, is the 7th from the G. And then finally you have the final G note at the tail end, and you have what's called an octave. So in that scale, starting from G, we have a second, a third, a fourth, a fifth, a sixth, a seventh, and then an octave. That's important for you to get. Once again, they're listed below the name of the scale in the separate image there. But just disregard the little symbols like the P and the triangle and that sort of stuff. There's a P on the 5 and a P on the 4. Everything else is triangles. Those are just refinements of the intervals. We do not need to fuss with that today. As far as you're concerned, that G major scale is also at the same time this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then 1 again, or 8. Let me know, before I go further, if what I just said makes sense to you. I will wait. I do not want to go any further until you let me know that that made sense. That image is going to stay up for the duration of our session because you need to have a reference back to it quite often. Tony is asking, is the A minor? If not, why not? Okay, not clear on the question, but if you're asking me, Tony, is the A note, these are notes that you're looking at on the fretboard. These are not chords. So when you say A minor, the term minor references chords. That's what's got me a little confused. When you're talking about notes, some people think, for example, like an A flat, which is what it would technically be called, they think of it as A minor. I think they're just walking around with a vague notion that you can lower the pitch of a note, flatten it, and somewhere in their experience of guitar, they've associated the term flat with minor. Minor, major, diminished, augmented, blah, 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 all that stuff, that's a reference to chord structure only, not a single note. So for the time being, all I want you to be thinking about is that this is a string of notes from G to G, happens to be a G major scale, and as such, you can see within it, there's a tone and a tone and a semitone and a tone and a tone and a tone and a semitone. And that last semitone is why there's an F sharp instead of an F natural. Okay, these are the sort of, this is why every time I begin to have a bit of a discussion of a concept that pushes you a bit more forward out of your comfort zone, and this will, if you're walking into the discussion with a remarkably hazy, foggy idea of the structure of a major scale, you know, tone, tone, semitone, tone, 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 semitone, or looking at it from this perspective today, G to A is a second, G to B is a third, G to C is a fourth, G to D is a fifth, G to E is a sixth, and G to F sharp is a seventh. That's a different perspective, but it ends up being the same thing. If understanding that has really got you bogged down, then you do have to go back and make an effort to get that major scale universe ironed out. It may mean that a part of your practice from here moving forward is not just about learning songs. Learning songs to me has always been like the final exam after everything else is done. But that's me. I admit that I'm a bit of a weird cat that way. And that's how I do it. But I know most people don't. Their whole reason for learning to play the guitar, me included, is to play music. Whether that's to play your own music, like improvising or writing your own stuff, or whether it's to play other people's music, that is very motivating when you sound similar to a piece of music you grew up with. That's very motivating. I get that. But you can't, you really, really, in my opinion, cannot learn the craft of this thing just by playing songs that are already composed. You have to move beyond that to a place where you can understand the language of the instrument, the language of the tool that you're working with, so that you can construct what you want, even if you don't know what you want yet. That's the freedom that it gives you. It's no different than your teachers who forced you to learn 26 letters when you were knee-high to a grasshopper. They drilled that into you. They just shoved it at you every day until you knew it. They even made songs with it. And many people, myself included, used to think that LMNOP was one letter. If you sing the alphabet song, right? LMNOP was one letter. But the point is, they drilled that into you to the point today, you don't think, if you're literate in those regards, you don't think twice about how to assemble that stuff to write out a sentence that you made up yourself. Consider what life would be if the only way you spoke to other people was that you used other people's sentences and phrases and inflections. You never did any of your own. Think about that for a moment. Language doesn't work that way, nor does music. There is an alphabet to it. In my case, I'm arguing it's the major scale. When you know it, like you know the alphabet, it begins to open up all kinds of new doors for you, for expression, for creativity, for just getting satisfaction in how things work. So that's my little rant there. Let me go back here, see if there's any other. Let me questions. I'm good. That's good. That's good. So if you played all these in chords, they would change A, become. Okay, Tony, what I'm going to say, and I've said this to several people often. I mean, it's a common experience. Whatever it is you're currently thinking, whatever extra information you're currently drawing into these images that you see and trying to make a connection to, I would just ask you to stop it. Just stop it. Not because you're not right, but your brain is now spending an awful lot of energy trying to make a connection to something I've presented with something you're thinking about, and the connection and your thought on it, maybe it might be right, but more often than not, it's completely wrong. And so people get more and more confused when they can't make the connection between what somebody's talking about or what they're presenting them with what it is they currently know or think they know. And they're trying to bridge that, and it's not working. So even if it's true, because I don't know kind of how you're thinking about this right now, I just want you not to do it. Just let's go with a kind of an empty beginner mind and accept that what you're looking at is a G major scale. That's all it is. Don't read anything else into it. And it's expressed in its letter alphabet form. And then below, it's expressed in terms of intervals from the G, or what's referred to as the root note, or I shouldn't say the root note, the tonic note of the scale. The tonic refers to the first note of the scale. It's the note around which all the other notes relate back to. So you have the tonic, and then you have the second and the third and the fourth and the fifth and the sixth and the seventh and the eighth, all the way through. Don't read any more into that, okay? This is for your good. It's not making my life any simpler. It's for you to be aware, because we're going to start manipulating things. Let me know. I know I keep asking. Scolded then. No, not scolded. Oh my. It does. People do interpret it that way. It's me asking you to not make connections that, in my experience, are not correct. But unless you're told, you may continue to try to make these connections thinking you're doing a good thing, when in fact you're just getting better and better at doing a bad thing. I'm not saying it's happening. I'm just saying we want to avoid that potentiality. You, sir, are not scolded. I just don't want you to get confused right off the top. I'm still reading the question. So if you played all these in chords, are you meaning play all the notes at once that you see in chords? They would change. The A becomes minor. I'm not clear on what the sentence is trying to tell me, Tony. But if you're talking about this kind of thing, from each note in the scale, because you obviously know something about building chords, if I built a chord from the G note, it would be made out of G, B, and D from that scale. And I can find those notes on the fretboard. Here's a G. I know it's hard to see. The B is right here on the 4th fret, 3rd string, and the D is 3rd fret, 2nd string. You put them all together. That's a G chord. It's not your standard strum around the campfire G chord, but it's a G chord. G, A minor, is the second chord built off of the A note that you see. B minor is a chord that would be built off the B. C major is built off of the C note. D major, sometimes D7, is built off the D note. E minor is built off the E note. F sharp diminished is built off the F sharp note, and then you're back to G, a whole octave higher. If you're talking about that chemistry, you're not wrong. And if you're saying that the A note that you see would be an A minor chord, you're also not wrong. But I don't want you to think about that right now. That's all I'm saying. Try not to anyway. I know it's hard. Who's here? Todd's here. Hey, Todd. Just got here. Cool. Thanks for showing. Okay, let me continue. I'm going to add now an image to this. Let me see if I can. Here it is. Now, hey, okay, Tony, you're going to get really upset with me now, because watch this. You see that? Just going to, whoop, I don't want to do that. That's fine. All right. What you see are two versions or two ways of looking at the same chord. This particular chord is an A minor chord. Now, you do not need to connect that to the scale beneath it right now. The reason I'm showing you this chord, both in its note form and its interval form, which you can see on the right-hand side, it's written as 1, which would be the A note. That's the note upon which the chord is based, and it's sitting on the 6th string 5th fret, and if you know your fretboard, that's an A. And then the third that you see is being referenced as what's called a flat third. Don't worry about that for now. And then the 2nd string note is referenced as a 5th. So all that means is, if you come back to the image of the G major scale just below that chord, they're both the same chord, by the way, just presented to you in a different way, and you start with the A note. I don't think this relates to your question, Tony, but if it does, let me know. If you start with the A note rather than a G note, you can build a chord using the notes of that scale starting on A, and you would need to grab the note A, and you'd go up to the 3rd note from A, and you'd grab the C, and then you'd go up to the 3rd note from C, and you'd grab the E. So A, C, and E make up a chord that's called A minor. The point I want to make here is that typically when we're talking about the structure of chords, how they're built, we will refer to, for example, A minor. The root note is A, the 3rd is C, and the 5th, or the 3rd is E, or I'm thinking backwards now. The 3rd is C, and the 5th is E. We'll say things like that. When you go to reference the A chord within the scale, that G major scale beneath it, you could argue that from the point of view of the scale, the intervals of the A minor chord should be 2, because I just finished telling you that the A is the 2nd note above G, so it's an interval of a 2nd from G. You could argue that it should be 2, the C would be the 4, and the E would be the 6. From the point of view of the scale, the chords you see, or the chord you see above, the A minor chord, you might be thinking, well, wait now, Steve. The A is the 2nd degree, the C is the 4th, and the E is the 6th. So isn't that chord built out of the 2nd, the 4th, and the 6th degree, or the 2nd interval, the 4th interval, the 6th interval? Isn't Isn't that how it's made? From the point of view of the scale, yes, you could reference it that way. But what we do very often is when we're dealing with the chord itself, independent of the scale, what we'll say to ourselves is that we'll treat the root note of the scale as one. Therefore, in relation to the A being now the one, the C becomes the third and the E becomes the fifth. So the C is a third up from A and the E is a fifth up from E. It's the fifth note up, or from A. It's the fifth note up. That's all it's telling you. We tend to do it with any chord, even though we could reference it back to the scale. So I want you to be clear that that is a very common weird situation that occurs in music, but it's very useful at the same time. When you're first introduced to it, it seems very weird. But from the point of view of the scale, you're absolutely right. You would say, no, it should be 2, 4, and 6. Why are you saying it's 1, 3, and 5, Steve? Because you're not starting on the 1, which is G. I'm temporarily treating the A as if it's 1, if you see what I mean. So, where the real 1 is, which is G, I could go G to B is 3 notes up, and B to D is 3 notes up. Or I could say G to D is 5 notes up. In other words, I've got a third and a fifth. And I could repeat that same language from each one of these notes, is what I'm trying to say. In this case, when the A minor chord comes up, I'm treating the A as the 1, and I go 3 notes up from A. That's a C. Go 3 notes up from C. That's an E. That's the process. If I did it from B, same idea. I treat the B as if it's 1. So I'll say B is 1, D is 3, F sharp is 5. Get the idea? I told you, this is going to hurt your brain a little bit. It takes a bit of repetitive exposure and talking to me and doing things for it to settle in. Okay, I'm going to get rid of the A minor, and I'm going to get something more familiar, a little more familiar anyway. Does anybody happen to know what chord I just put up there? Again, when you see these two images at the very top, the two images are the same chord. One is expressing it in terms of the notes that make it up, and the other is expressing it in terms of the intervals from the root. And the root of the chord is always written out in G on these in red, on these pictures, so you'll know. Does anybody have any idea what chord that is? It's kind of a weird way to draw a very, very, very familiar chord that you've been playing all your life, I'm sure. Tony had a light bulb moment. Good, man. Got it, flat third in A minor shape, C, blah, blah. Okay. Todd, so then does and F sharp, B flat, and F sharp make a chord in the G scale? Yeah, Tony, you've got it. It is a G chord. You're right. Todd, so then does B flat, if I'm reading this right, or are you saying B, D, and F sharp? Oh, I see what you're saying. So then does B, D, and F sharp make a chord in the G scale? Let's go back. Let's go back. Where's the B? There's the B. You go a third up from it. That's a D, sorry. You go a third up from that. You combine those notes together, as you're saying, Todd. B, D, and F sharp. You put them together. I'll play them for you if you like. Let's see. I can go B, D, and F sharp. Right? See that sound? That's a chord. If I do it from A, I could take A, C, and E. Put those together. A, C, and E, if you know where some notes are, other than these standard shapes that you make. That's a chord. So maybe, Todd, you haven't gone through this yet, but I've done a lot of work with students going over this process. If I took each one of those notes from the G major scale and built a chord from each one of those notes using this 1-3-5 skipping process, take one note, skip one, take the next, skip one, take the next. Sorry for hitting the mic. You would get this sound. Here's G major, A minor, B minor, C major, D major, E minor, F sharp diminished, and back to G. So it sounds like the G scale prettied up, is what it sounds like. So yeah, you're right. And you can do that for each and every note. It's odd to me that realizations like that, especially for guitarists, are, to me, really, really, really late in the process of learning the guitar. Because we've gotten so hung up on shapes, and we use them all the time, don't get me wrong. And our fingers get used to shapes, and we, of course, go to the shapes that we're most comfortable with. Most people, if I say play a D, they'll do this. And I go, well, why aren't you doing that? And why aren't you doing this? And why aren't you doing this? Or this? How come? Oh, because that's the only D I know. And it's their brain making the connection that D is that shape. I told this earlier, I had one student profoundly misunderstood the fretboard. D, in her mind, was that shape. And I said, go ahead and play another D. And she went, well, that's a D. Okay, play another one. She took the same shape and just moved it to a different set of strings. Well, that's a D. So in her mind, wherever I play that shape, that's a D chord. Now, folks, that's a profound misunderstanding of what's going on. And the only reason that happened is because that student did not get exposed to the fact that the D chord, the shape that she is playing, is because of the notes that make it up. So you need to know something about the notes that make up chords in order to make sense of chords. And yet, for guitarists, we seem to skip all that for the longest time. It's a really kind of a tragic situation. It only seems to occur in guitar world. Piano players don't experience this. They understand the intimate, direct connection between chords and the notes from the major scale. They get it. They're taught that from day one. You do that for a guitarist, and they just won't stay with you. They'll go find somebody else that can help them shred other people's faces off with fast playing and licks and stuff like that. All of which is good, don't get me wrong. Don't get me on a rant either. Tony, if you flatten F sharp, would that become a dominant seventh? Okay, I the way you said it doesn't make sense, but I understand what you're asking. If you play a G chord and you, instead of fully playing the regular G, you play most of the G and add an F sharp to it, that's a G major 7 chord. Now I'm just going to start from here. What Tony's saying is if I took that F sharp note and flattened it, that becomes a dominant 7th chord. That's correct. I'm going to demonstrate this to you. I'm glad you're asking these questions because it means no matter how complex my discussion may be. I got to get my screen back here. Where is it? Okay, that's fine. No matter how complex that might be, the process is not hard. It's just new to the brain, and it causes people to go, ah, and they don't want to feel like, ah. They want to feel cool playing, and I get that they get that. I've just lost my YouTube connection. I know you can still see me, but I want to go back in here. Hold on one second. and just come in. All right, I'll do that in a bit. Okay, so let's get rid of the A or the G chord for now. Oh no, I don't want to. Yes, Tony identified it. You took me off track there, man. That was that was good. This is a G chord. If you look at the notes that are making up that chord, G, B, and D, there just happens to be two G's in there. That's all. The other notes become, if you look at the scale, you need the G, go up 3 notes, you need a B, go up 3 notes, you need a D. The G is the number 1, or the root of the chord. The B is the third. You can see this in the image. You can see as B relates to the 3 in this image on the right-hand side, the B on the left, the third on the right. And then D is the 5th, and you can see that on the left, and then you can see the 5th on the right. So I'm going to go back to get my YouTube screen because I can't see the questions right now. Just give me one second here, folks. Hold on a bit. There and here. And here. And here. Okay. I think I'm good now. Got my questions back. Sorry for that. Now, I don't want you to finger this particular chord because it's an awkward one to finger. But what I do want you to understand, there it is that it comes from the big familiar G major chord that you're used to. Okay. I've just isolated some elements of it so that we only need to work with the things we need to work with. If you do have a guitar handy, go ahead and try to build it. You can see I have my first finger on the lower G. My pinky is sitting on the higher G, so those two notes are an octave apart. Those are the two red notes you see. The B is right here under my third finger on the 3rd string 4th fret, and the D is on the 2nd string 3rd fret, but it's a little gnarly to make. And I'm also not hitting the 5th string. I'm hitting it, but I have it muted out. My first finger is muting it out, and I'm not hitting the 1st string at all, just leaving it out of the mix. So that's a G major chord. Now when you look down on it, at one level you can see the shape, that's good. At another level, I'd like you to be able to see the intervals, or the notes rather, that make it up. And then at even a deeper level, I want you to see the intervals that make it up. This is the 1. This is another 1. The B is the 3rd, and the D is the 5th. And you can see that on the image on the right. I hope that makes a bit of sense. I'll go back and check some questions here. Yeah, Tony did. Yep. If you flatten F sharp, would that be? Yep, that's correct, Tony. This is another one with flat 3rd. And the D is the 5th, and you can see that for a dominant chord, you don't need to flatten the 3rd. You want the 3rd to be as it exists in the scale. You don't want to. I think that if that's what you're asking. Tony Stevens, you're getting an echo. Oh, okay. I might be on the wrong screen. Hold a sec. You don't want an echo. Flat 3rd. No, for a dominant chord, you don't need to flatten the 3rd. You want the 3rd to be as it exists in the scale. Let me see what I can do. Has the echo gone? I think that if that's what you're asking. Tony Stevens, you're getting an echo. Oh, okay. I might be on the wrong screen. Hold a sec. You don't want an echo. Let me know if the echo has gone. before I continue. Third to be as it exists in the scale. Let me see what I can do. Has the echo gone? Oh. I think that if that's what you're asking. Tony Stevens, you're getting an echo. Tell me if it's gone now. If the echo has gone. Nope, still there. Give it another second, see if it's gone yet. Still no. Getting echo. I'll just wait a few more minutes to make sure. Okay, good. Yeah, there was a level up that I didn't want. I'm still not back to the screen that I want to be back on. So what I'll do is I'll keep going. It's no problem to be on this one, and I'll flip back to this one, and which is not the screen I want, so I can check questions, and I should be able to do it without that echo. So everything is okay. Okay, good. Thanks, guys. That was weird. Not sure how that happened, but okay. Now here's where the real beauty starts. Everything we've just done. I mean, it took a little while, so maybe I need to continue on Wednesday with this. But it's an important idea. So I'm going to get rid of the G, because this is just a starting point. I want you to understand this. So what you're looking at, those two, I keep saying two chords, the two images are the same chord. It's just a plain old G major chord. It's probably not one you play around the campfire, but it's a G major chord nonetheless. I'm going to get rid of that one. Where are you? Get rid of that. And let me put it up for a second. I want you to put your concentration on the G note that's on the fourth string of these images. In other words, that's the root, or the one. That's why it's in red. Focus on that for a moment, because that's going to change. So let's get rid of it. Now, here's the challenge. Tell me what changed. Let me know. It'll either really hurt your head or you'll get it. That seems to be the way this works. It's a tricky one. Unfortunately, on these live streams, the delay can be up to 30 seconds long. So by the time you hear from my request, I don't get an answer back, it seems like, for like almost a minute. No, nothing changed on the B. I'm going to do it again. You have to watch carefully. I'm going to get rid of that image. I'll put the original back. And I want you to look at the G note that's on the fourth string, fifth fret. Put in your mind where that G note is. Okay? Again, it's the root of the chord. That's why it's listed as 1 on the right-hand side. Here's the next set. What just happened? Right. The G turned into an F sharp note. In other words, if you look at the scale beneath this chord, when you move down in pitch from the higher G that you see in the scale, the next note you move to, one semitone below, is an F sharp. I know this is tough to follow. It's tough to follow because you're just not used to doing it. It isn't because it's intrinsically difficult. It's probably shaken up your view of how to think about the fretboard. But my point here is when you look at the new chord, it went from this, there's the G. I'm going to come back to my other screen here. There's the G. And I took the G and I moved it down a fret, but I'm going to refinger it so it makes more sense to me. There's the sound of that. So what happened is the higher sounding G, this is a G, but this is a higher one, it moved down one fret to an F sharp note, which you should know, or at least be able to figure it out based on looking at the scale images. So what happened is, from the note point of view, the G note turned into an F sharp note. From the interval point of view, the root note, or the 1, got turned into the 7th, what we call the major 7th of the G major scale. Now, if you look at the interval scale beneath the G major scale written in notes, you'll see that the F sharp note in the written version corresponds to the interval of a 7th. Now you might be asking yourself, well, why is that called the 7th, Steve? Well, G is 1, A is 2, B is 3, B is 3, C is 4, D is 5, E is 6, F sharp is 7, and then you're back to 1. So what we've done is replace that G, which was the root, with the 7th. And when you do that, you end up with, nothing else changed, by the way, just the one note. You end up with G major 7. That's what it's called. It's not minor 7, it's not dominant 7, it's major 7. The reason why we call it major 7 is because the interval from the G to the F sharp way up at the top in the scale version is, if you analyze it, which you haven't learned how to do yet, is a major 7th. So this is a G major 7 chord. All the other notes are there. G, B, and D are there, and it's like you took the little main chord, G, B, and D, and you added the 7th to it. So in some sense, if you were really picky about it, you could say it's G add 7. But we don't say it that way. It's G major 7. Okay, I'm going to check some questions. Sorry, not C minor. Blah, blah, blah. C minor. Nope, not C minor. Not sure what. Oh, you think. Oh, I see what you were thinking. Tony, you're thinking of this shape right here. Where is it? I see what you're saying. This is how. Now, part of this is it's hard to see. I do not have the ability right now to have a second camera on my hand to show you things close up. So there's that issue. I get that. But what is really happening is you're looking at this and you're seeing a shape, which I totally get. This is why I'm doing this. Seeing shapes is very useful, but that shape is not this shape. Even though this little cluster, what's happened here, Tony, is that this note on the 5th string went down to the G. That's a C right there. This went down, and this little cluster came in. So they look very similar, don't they? C minor. Yeah, that's an entirely different chord. When you see things in terms of shape, that can be very useful. It can also be, and if it's the only way you see your chords, it can be the worst tool at your disposal because you compare everything in terms of shape. And you really don't have any way of really describing the thing that you just made based on shape. You just, for example, often people will take, if I play this, they'll look at it and say, oh, well, it looks like the shape of an F. And they're right. But that doesn't help them name the chord unless they know things go like this. F, G, A flat, build the chord from there. That's an A flat chord. Unless they know that, they have no way to describe it other than saying, well, it looks like an F played from the 4th fret. Using shape alone as your only tool to understanding chord construction is going to really wreak havoc on your understanding of how stuff works when it comes to chords. Does that make sense? Todd Masters had a light bulb moment. Okay, good. Tony says, yep, got it. It's funny, some people say yep, Y-E-P. I say yup, Y-U-P. And I looked it up in YouTube, not YouTube, on Google, and apparently Y-E-P is the more common of the two. Dang it all. I thought I was. I always say yup, not yep. I never say yep. Anyway, interesting. So what I'm arguing for, and I know this is challenging, and I think we're going to have to take this as a part 2 on Wednesday, is to get you past looking at shape and get you, this is partly too how you get better at knowing what's under your fingers on your fretboard, is you take advantage of the chord shapes that you're really good at, but you stop looking at them as shapes and you go, okay, well, that's a D and that's an F sharp and that's an A and that's a D and that's another F sharp. Oh, well, it's just a D chord. Well, it doesn't look like any D chord I've ever seen. It's just this, kind of spread out more. There's the little portion of it. It's just fingered differently. So even new fingerings throw people off. Sometimes I've played this chord, and they'll go, well, it looks like C, but you're not using the right finger, Steve. The truth is, there are no right fingers. The fingers always depend on context. Always. Even though they get presented to you at the beginning of your guitar studies, put your first finger here, second finger there. That's one possibility. It could also be this. I'll give you the finger. It could also be that. But so that finger's free to do something else. It could be this. So this finger is free to do other stuff, but they're still a C chord. So even the fingering doesn't make any difference. It's just the shape that's throwing people off. Okay, let me take this one step further. So right now, what you've done is I started with a plain old G major chord, even though it's not a familiar one. I took this G and I moved it down a fret, which is a very awkward fingering. So I'm going to replace that with my 3rd finger and put my pinky beneath it. That's just more comfortable. That's all that was. And that turned the chord into something called G major 7. An interesting side point here. And if you have to take a deep breath to recover from everything I'm talking about, do so. The original chord, G major, is just made of 3 notes. If you look carefully at it, I'll bring it up for you. Where am I here? Get rid of that, bring that up. If you look at it, it's just made of 3 notes. A couple of G's, B and D. But so G, B, and D, that's what makes up that chord. The G is the root, or the 1. The B is the 3rd, that's 3 notes higher than G. And the D is the 5th. That's 5 notes higher than G. So we'll say that the G chord is made up of the 1, the 3, and the 5. G, 3 notes higher. G, A, B is the 3rd. And then E is the 5th. The 1, 3, and 5. Okay? Now, interestingly, when I get rid of the reference and I go and just move 1 note down, all of a sudden, I've moved from having 3 notes in the chord to having 4. So 3-note chords, no matter how you play them, are referred to as triads. So your big chords that you guys probably mostly play, C major, that just has 3 notes. G just has 3 notes, even if you do that version. Just has 3 notes in it, G, B, and D. D, F, and A. A, C, and E. Just 3 notes. And we call them triads, which makes sense. There's 3 notes, 3 notes. But as soon as you add a 4th note into a chord, you'd think it would be called a quatrad or a tetrad. But no, we don't do that in music. We want to confuse you endlessly, and we call them 7th chords. Excuse me. And the only reason that's the case is, as I said, when I moved from the G to the F sharp is the major 7th of the scale of G major. So somehow or another in the history of naming things, that 7th added into the basic chord became G major 7, and it just stuck. That's the best I can tell you. It just stayed. And so there is, unfortunately, some inconsistencies, in my opinion. No, you don't have chords in percussion. That's why percussionists are not... Oh, well, am I about to say that? No, I shouldn't say that. Lovely sound, the major 7th. Yes, it is, sir. It's a very relaxed sound. Always saw chord 7, didn't know what they were. This is just one type of 7th, Todd. There's major 7ths, there's minor 7ths, there's dominant 7ths, and minor 7 flat 5s, and major minor 7ths. There's all kinds of different ones. And some of it you just have to learn to understand. When people say D7, what they really mean is D dominant 7, but we don't say the dominant very often because we're just lazy. And it's understood that D with a 7 after it means D dominant 7. It doesn't mean D major 7 or D minor 7 or any other type. It means that. And it's just understood. It's like many things in language. It's just understood the way you do stuff. Don't have chords in percussion. Yeah, you're right. But you're taking up some guitar. And you know how important I think drummers are. Mr. Neil Peart was my hero. And his passing was a tremendous shock. So I give a lot of credit to percussionists and drummers. But they still go to music school, like most of them do, like everybody else who is playing note-based instruments. They still have to learn the same stuff. So they should know it. Whether they do or not, that's kind of up to them. Okay, let me just, I'm going to go one step further now, and then I'm going to call it for today. And I will continue this on Wednesday, because this is important for you to spend more than just, I think now, one session on. Okay, I want you now to keep looking at the F sharp, or the major 7th. By the way, that's what the little triangle means. It means major 7th. It's the interval of the 7th from the G note of that scale beneath the chord. G, A, B, C, D, E, F. That's the 7th note up. It's the major 7th. Watch that F sharp. I'm about to get rid of the chord and pull up the next image. What happened to the F sharp? I'm not going to keep talking. What happened to the F sharp? Let me know. Excuse me. So now we have only one note is changing right now. Now, just so you know, there is no F note in the G major scale. There's an F sharp, but there's no F note in there. So here's what I want you to think about. If in the G major 7 chord, where the F sharp was, we could, or I could rather, describe the structure of this chord as being, this is the 1, that's the G. This, under my third finger, is the F sharp, so I'll call that the 7th. 1, 7. This is a B note, which is the third of the G, 3 notes away from G, so it's a third higher. And under here, on this D right here, if I expose it, okay, that's the 5th. So this chord has a shape. It has the notes G, B, D, and F sharp. Sorry, G, B, D, and F sharp. And it has the intervals 1, I'll go 1, 7, or major 7, 1, 7, 3, 5. 1, 7, 3, 5. That was the major 7th. Now I'm going to take the F sharp, and as you can see in the image right now, it's been lowered to F. Now what happens when you take any note? Here's the F sharp. What happens when you take any note and lower it in pitch? What have we done to the original note and lowered it in pitch? Well, we've lowered it in pitch. That's one way you can put it. Musicians, from a visual point of view, will say to themselves, Stephen, you took the F sharp and you did the action of flattening it, lowering it in pitch by 1 fret. That's a reference to the action I took. I took the action of lowering it to an F note. In other words, you can think of it as I flattened the F sharp and it becomes F. From the interval point of view, now I can describe what I've got as being 1, that's the G. The 3rd, or the B, still stays. The 5th, or the D, still stays. And this becomes what's called the flat 7. So this now, it's a G7 chord. Not G major 7, not G minor 7. It's a G7 chord, which should be called G dominant 7. And some people do, but, you know, it's a shortcut version of saying the same thing. So G just with the number 7 after it. And its formula becomes 1, 3, 5, flat 7. The major 7th chord, the G major 7 chord, its formula was 1, 3, 5, 7. You might say major 7 as well. When you lower the major 7th 1 fret down, it becomes F, but the formula becomes 1, 3, 5, flat 7, because you flattened what was otherwise the regular 7th in the scale, the F sharp. It does not mean, excuse me, that the note you're ending up with is a flat note. It doesn't mean that. That's why I said it's an action that you're taking. I took the F sharp and I flattened it, and it happens to become F. Does that make sense? This is part of the language of chord formulation. So here's what you've done. Here's the original chord. We have a root, or both are ones, you can call them that. Root, root, 3, 5. So 1, 3, and 5 is the chord formula for, in this case, the G major scale, G, B, and D, or G major chord using G, B, and D. But 1, 3, and 5 is the formula for any major chord. When I play a D chord, D, F sharp, and A, the D is the 1, the F sharp is the 3, and the A is the 5. So it's 1, 3, and 5 from a D major scale. C is C, E, and G, 1, 3, and 5 from a C major scale. This is the beauty of using intervals. The intervals do not change from one chord to the next of the same type. Major to major is good. Minor to minor is good. Diminished to diminished is good. The intervals won't change. So this G major chord, if I moved it here, and none of the intervals that made it up changed, it's an A major chord now because this is the A. The root went from being a G to being an A. And just based on shape, if I kept the shape the same, I'd have an A major chord, and the intervals would be A and or root and root, A and A. This would be the major third, that'd be the fifth. Root, third, 5. Root, third, fifth. The third happens to be C sharp, and the fifth happens to be E. So you can see that the notes will have to change to get to the new chord, but the intervals don't. Critical, important point when it comes to understanding this fretboard. If the intervals don't change, then this chord shape is movable anywhere you want, and everywhere you play it, it will always be root 3, 5. Root 3, 5. You'll have to figure out what the actual notes are. It's good to know that. But anywhere you do it, root, those two notes, 3, 5. You turn it into C major 7, that nice sounding chord that Eric referenced. Now we have root major 7th, 3, 5. And that's a G major 7 chord. But I can now move that anywhere I like. And the notes have changed, but the intervals have stayed the same. Root major 7, 3, 5. Or root 7, 3, 5. If I take that 7th in the original G major 7 chord and lower it again, keeping everything else the same, now we are where the image is today. And that's a dominant 7 chord. And its formula would be root, flat 7. Remember, the major 7 or the regular 7 was F sharp. We have now lowered it in pitch by 1 fret, and it's become, from the interval point of view, a flat 7. 1, flat 7, 3, 5. Move that chord anywhere you like, it's still the same. 1, flat 7, 3, 5. And what happens over time is your eyeballs start to recognize what an interval of a flat 7 looks like. You know, there. That's what it looks like. One way to do it. What the interval of a third looks like when you're crossing many strings, or what a fifth looks like when you're crossing many strings. You're probably more familiar with the fifth as being the power chord. That's a fifth right there, but it's also a fifth here. So we'd have to talk more about that. But G7. Let me just take it one more step. And then what we'll do on Wednesday, we'll do the minor versions and some other extra versions of this. I'm going to take that F, and I'll put up, and I'm going to lower it again. Watch this. I'm going to get rid of this. I'm going to go, whoop, bye-bye, and go here. Now the F, if I lower it one more pitch, becomes an E. Everything else still stays the same. Beautiful chord. It's still a G in its essence. G, B, and D is still there, but I've added an E to it. So it's called G. Well, look at the scale below. What is the interval from G to E? Well, count the letters. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Oh, it's 6. No wonder the chord is called G6. Are there any light bulbs going on at this point? I hope so. Dominant, flattened, Eric, you end up with a minor. Yeah, that's a good point. The flat 7 terminology is the same as referencing a minor 7. So it just depends on who you're talking with. Some people will say, yeah, the major seventh became a minor seventh. I'm saying the major seven, which I'm also interchangeably calling the seven, gets turned into a flat seven. It's exactly the same. You're right, Eric. Tony, got it. Tony Stevens, I know bar F7. Yeah, that's this guy. The same chemistry can be going on. Maybe I'll demonstrate that on Wednesday, even though it's a different shape altogether. But again, I'm betting, Tony, that you know it's called F7 only because that's a name assigned to that shape that somebody showed you, or you read in a book, or you watched on a video. But you probably, and correct me if I'm wrong, I'm just making these silly assumptions, you have no idea why it's called F7. And how does F7 differ from F major 7 or F dominant 7? Hint, F dominant and F7 are the same thing. Trick question. F minor 7. F minor 7 flat 5. Like, what's going on here, Stephen? There's a lot going on, which is really cool, but it's hard on the head. Right next to A7. Tony, stay. Okay, Tony. Minor of G. Todd Mass. Very cool. I'm not sure, Tony, what you mean by minor of G, but that's okay. I know you're probably getting a lot of stuff running through your mind right now, and I totally get it. It's normal. So here's what happened. Let's stand back for a second. All that I've shown you today is that this weird-looking shape of a G chord, a regular plain old G major chord, which nobody plays that way, not really. They'll often play it as a regular bar, or they'll do this. They'll play the top part of it. But this particular fingering is not very common. I'm using it just as a reference to get you understanding how interval structure of the chord, how when it changes, how it changes the quality of the chord. And hence, starts to give you some clues about how the chord is built. And everything goes back to the G major scale you see on your screen, and everything can be expressed either in notes or beneath the G major scale, the same scale expressed as intervals, which are the intervals from the root. The A is the interval of a second from the root. The B is the interval of a third from the root. The fourth is the interval of, the C is the interval of a fourth from the root. The D is the interval of a fifth from the root, etc., etc. Don't confuse that with, at the same time, which is true, our previous notion of G to A is a tone, A to B is a tone, B to C is a semitone, C to D is a tone. Tone, tone, semitone, tone, 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 tone. Don't confuse the two. They're both correct. They're just different views of the same thing. Okay, so here's what we did. I gave you this weird-looking G, and I identified it as a three-note chord with two Gs, a B, and a D. The Gs become, here, the root, or the one, in this case. The B, if you look at the scale, is the third, and the E is, or the D rather, is the fifth. G, B, and D. If I take this G, keep this one where it is, but I take that G, and I lower it down in pitch by 1 fret, effectively what I've done is taken the G and flattened it by 1 fret. Turns out it ends up on the note F sharp, which, again, if you look at the scale, the F sharp is there, and it's just below the higher G, the one at the end of the right end of the scale. When that gets added to what is otherwise the regular G major chord, it becomes a chord called G major 7, because the F sharp is the interval of a major seventh from the root. So now you have a chord that is root, major 7. I often say 7 as well, so I'll go 1, 7, 3, 5. That's probably the better way to think about it. 1, 7, 3, 5. Then I took that note, which was F sharp, and I made it even flatter. Now for this I had to do a whole bunch of refingering to get it. So everything else stayed the same. I still have a root, I have a third, and I have a fifth. That's the G, the B, and the D. They're still there. Now, what was F sharp has been lowered again, excuse me, to an F, and that's the flat 7. The F sharp was the 7, and this is the flat 7. So the formula for a G major chord is 1, 3, 5. Playable anywhere on the fretboard. The notes will change, but the intervals don't. Lower the G to the F sharp. Do some refingering shuffle. The finger shuffle. And you get F major 7, and its formula is 1, 7, 3, 5. Movable anywhere on the fretboard. Intervals don't change. Whatever that note is here is the name of the chord, but there's the quality of the chord, and the quality is referred to as a major 7 chord. Okay. Take the F sharp, lower it once again, keep everything else the same. I still have the root, I still have the third, I still have the fifth, and this note is an F, which is not in the G major scale. It's in between the E and the F sharp. But I have flattened the F sharp to F. It's the term flattened, flat 7, is an action you're taking. Sometimes people think the note you end up with when you do that is a flat note, like, flat 7. or F flat is what I'm trying to say. That's not what's happening. It's just an F note. The action was to flatten, to get there. It's a visual reference, numerically, to do it. So now I have root, flat 7, 3, 5. And if I took the flat 7 and dropped it one more, now it's gone to the point, it's gone so low, it's become an E. And when you look at the scale, you see that the E note, we've gone from F sharp to F to E. The E note is the 6th interval from the G. So we call this a G6. You add the 6 to it. It's not that difficult. But you'll see people who won't buy music that have chords like G6 and G major 7 and G13 because they scare them away. They don't understand where they're coming from. No need for it. This is very straightforward. Okay? All right. I'm going to cut it off there. I'm going to leave the questions till you guys have sort of thought that through a little bit. If you would like these charts, I'll put together a PDF tomorrow, and I'll have them. I'll have a link where you can just go and get them, so that you have something to look at to reference this. And then on Wednesday, we're going to just continue. We're going to extend it using the same structures. We're just going to keep manipulating the intervals within it to help you see where certain chord names are coming from and help you understand how truly simple the process is, and ultimately that these things are movable around the fretboard as long as you know where the root note of the chord is and you recognize the shape as a dominant chord or a major 7 chord or a whatever, then you can name the chord very quickly instead of having to look it up in books. If you had trouble with this material to the point where you're not even aware at this stage that a G chord is based on grabbing a G, skip the A, grab a B, skip the C, grab a D, then in the edit of this video, I'll make sure I reference the Where Stuff Comes From series, because in there I go into how that works, how the intervals work there. So, whew, that took a lot even out of me. What do you guys think? Let me know if you have any questions right now. if they're really big ones, I'll address them on Wednesday. I'd rather you. I don't want to hold you for more than an hour and a half. That's just not fair to you guys. So if you do have some questions, let me know. I'll stick around and try to answer them. If they're big ones, I'm going to leave them till Wednesday. If they're tiny ones, I can answer them right now. And that's all good. So at the very least, what you have is a new way to play a G chord. Let's look at the good side of this whole craziness on your brain. There's a G major chord. If I include an F sharp in it, it's G major 7. If I include an F in it, that's G7. If I lower the F to the E, it's G6. Couldn't be simpler. Now the fingerings may not, may not be comfortable to you, but that's part of learning, right? You have to get exposed to these things and then just keep repeating them. My head is buzzing. Nighty night. See you Wednesday. Yeah, mine is buzzing too. I know. It's tough. This is a tough session. No question about it. Okay, well listen, I'm going to leave it there, and we will come back on Wednesday. We'll do a very, very quick review of this, and then I'll dig into some remaining insights, all from the same chord. Nothing has changed. I'm still using the weird G major chord, and I'm just going to keep manipulating it to create a few other chords. And ultimately, by using these things a lot, you start to recognize their shapes, of course, just like any other chord you're already comfortable with. And if you're really paying attention, you know what notes are making them up and what intervals are existing within them. Hope that makes at least a little bit of sense. Listen, guys, thanks so much for hanging out with me. Hour and a half of making your head thump, I think, is enough. Go and get some rest. I'll put together the PDF, have it made available so you can have these charts in front of you. And let's meet up again on Wednesday and do this. And then on Friday, I will leave that one up to you. I might even just make it a Q&A session, because you may have lots of questions in general. So, Steve Dempster, Dempster Guitar Studio, signing off. If you think you find this valuable content in these videos, you know what to do. Share them around. Give it a thumbs up. And if you are not currently subscribed to my channel, go and make that subscription. Make it happen. And I'll make sure you're part of the team that gets more and more of this stuff. Okay, my friends, I will see you on Wednesday. It will be the same time, and we'll be in touch. Stay well, stay healthy. Talk to you soon. Bye.